Hi, everyone. Welcome to Recruitment in View, the podcast that's about and related to everything around recruitment. Today is a very special episode for me because I've been wanting to talk about this ever since probably mid last year when they announced that JSL or joint several liability was going to come and haunt us. And it's still haunting us, and we will have that haunt for the years to come as the impacts really unfold. Joining me on this podcast is James Crabtree from Bar2. Bar2 is a payroll and compliance business, so totally relevant to the right person to have to do this discussion today. Let's start with, I suppose, the first natural question, right? There's still a lot of, I'm not going to say misinformation, that's probably the wrong term to use, but there's still a little bit of confusion about the importance of JSL. So why do we think it's important, first of all, James?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. And I think to feed off that last point, there's misinformation. Yeah, maybe some, but I think a lot of information is out on the topic. And I think the reason that JSL is so important and why there's so much conversation about it is because it's fundamentally changing the relationship between recruitment businesses, payroll partners, intermediaries, umbrella companies, and of course, when you get to the end client. So that full chain is now joint and severally liable. So it's, historically, a lot of the labor market has operated on kind of more basic assumptions where you've outsourced it. So the liability is outsourced as well. And therefore, risk for me is, I don't need to stress
push
about
it down
that.
the chain. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. And to be fair, I think that's how, for a long, long time, a lot of the businesses around this industry have behaved. Recruiters place labor. Payroll provider then kind of pays them. The end client then gets the benefit of the labor being completed. What joint and several liability does is challenge that thinking and ultimately say that you can't just point your finger down the road anymore, down the chain anymore, so to speak. It's if something goes wrong, we've all got to be part of that discussion. So if tax has not been paid or workers have been engaged in ways that kind of don't stand up to that scrutiny, and there's going to be more of that. And I think the conversation maybe of how it's going to be scrutinized and policed is another topic completely as well. But, if there is disguised arrangements happening in the chain, exposure doesn't necessarily stop the company that's processed payroll. It could be agency up to the client as well. So it's moving upstream.
Yeah. And what's really interesting, we go back to the comment about like push it down the chain, that belief system was there. There is a big belief system in that world that insurance will save the day as well if it all goes wrong. And I'm just sitting there and thinking to myself, why would they pay for someone's incompetency as from an insurance perspective? And the one thing that HMRC, the recent information coming out in the last couple of months has been, which is they will go up the chain if they knew that was we'll call it a scam scheme of some description, right? That those weren't being paid.
If you know, you should have known. Yeah.
Should have known, right?
Yeah.
Should have known better, essentially, right? So, I definitely think it's an important subject. The one thing I will certainly say, probably more in certain sectors like recruitment agencies still potentially, certainly in things like subcontractors worlds in construction that might have labor only provisions and stuff like that. I would imagine there's still people doing nothing. And what will happen to these people that do nothing, do you think?
It's really interesting. We had a conversation about this between myself, our CEO, and one of our clients. And I think there is a bit of bated breath in the industry still. And I think there are people waiting for a bit of a maybe gotcha moment somewhere.
Yeah.
But will that come? I don't know. I think the honest answer is there's not been anything yet. We'd always expect a bit of a bang moment when legislation gets put into place. But people are still waiting for these murmurs, or you're hearing conversations and stuff like that. But probably nothing at first. And I think that's probably why we're seeing underacting, because until that big case gets put in the headlines, until something goes through the airwaves where they're like, oh, that's a small business. That sounds a lot like my business. Oh, that's a small haulier, or that's a this or what. That's when I think people start to think it's a bit more real because it's emotional. And small business livelihood and things like that, people get more invested. But who knows, day to day, things still are continuing on. I think there's probably been a slight contraction. There's been some instances of people doing knee jerk into, hey, we've had this type of engagement with this supplier here, and all of a sudden we're going to move everyone internal to PAYE. that's probably not the right play either, because there's a time and place for everything. There's risk associated with all of those different labor models. So yeah, I think at the moment people are just trying to push on and keep going. The economy's in a bit of a contraction as well, so I think people are focusing on next month, next week, next month, next quarter, as opposed to
Well, so
big
I've got a
legislation.
bit of a predictor, but actually, let's before we go into that, I just want to. It's interesting you say about the economy, because it would be interesting to see how you've seen from your side of things how the industry has responded. I've got a sort of a viewpoint as well. We can compare the dots if you like in this, but the one thing I think that is an interesting one of why people have done nothing is, and I'm just going to be honest and put it out there, I think people worried about more, can their business survive, rather than about something they don't know could hit them. How far are they actually going to go? But I do have a predictor that it is going to be quite bad.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
would you agree that, from what you've seen, is that generally how businesses are feeling? If they're not making money, it's kind of like, well, what they're going to find a business that's going to fold if I'm not making money anyway, right? So it's an interesting one in the current climate.
Yeah, I mean, the current climate is interesting as a whole. Like the macroeconomics of everything is wild. A lot of our clients at Bar2 are obviously in haulage, fuel prices. A lot of that is
Yeah,
there's a lot of that's a huge impact on the supply chain, and once that slows down, that's going to have a tumultuous or big impact, excuse
yeah,
me,
yeah,
on the rest of the supply chain in food and all that kind of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
I don't know. I think people are cautious in many ways. There's huge global tensions. There's huge financial pressure from a business perspective, with tighter legislation and tighter scrutiny, clearly designed to put pressure on those places where they can and claim the tax that they need. And then on the personal level, like cost of living and all of those types of things. I think, yeah, people have got a lot on their plates at the moment, regardless of.
Well, to put it in perspective, I did this for a business not that long ago, and we were looking at what the minimum rate costs, we'll call it umbrella payway, right? Because of minimum wage increases have
Mm,
been like in the last, and it wasn't this April's rates. It was actually the 3 years prior. Now, 3 years prior, if you get my head around what years they would have been, so that's 2005, 2004, 2003. In those first 3 years, minimum wage had increased by 35% or
yeah,
thereabouts.
yeah,
And actually, with the recent rise for April, and obviously like costs have been added because of NI, then went up as well. It's around a 40% increase. Now, we can say in one end of the spectrum, great, because young people or people that are on low incomes need to keep up with inflation, and we've
of
had
course.
not hyperinflation, it's not that bad, but it feels like it at
Feels
times.
like it. Yeah,
Well, the
yeah.
construction industry thinks it's hyperinflation anyway,
Of course, of
but
course.
like especially haulage. But they've had that major shift in inflation. But from a project that was budgeted several years earlier, that's like their workforce, which could be hundreds, if not thousands of people,
Yeah,
having
insane.
huge amount of increase. It's quite scary how much that cost has gone up for them.
Yeah, yeah. I was having a conversation with someone on the weekend just gone about it, and he's a construction business owner, and he was talking about his daughter. Cost of minimum wage has gone up, all happy days, and he's looking at it going, well, actually, that the knock on effect for me as a business owner is, it's huge,
Significant. Yeah.
significant. Um, but yeah, which side do you sit?
Yeah, it's a difficult
um,
one, right? Because
yeah,
sometimes construction industry is working anything between a 1 or 2% margin to hopefully they're doing 15% or more, right?
mm,
Depending on the industry, depending on where they are. You increase someone's salary by 10%, sounds like a great, or even 5%, sounds like a great initiative, but it could be the difference between profit for that company or not, which
exactly that.
is,
Yeah,
yes, you got to give back, don't get me wrong, but you got to do it in a way that is economically viable
yeah, yeah,
all round.
definitely.
And we're not going to go into politics here
No,
or
of course
finance
not.
because that was the wrong kind of podcast. But it's interesting, like I say, and from you were talking about the impact from construction. I mean, I know from I suppose dealing with the sort of in-house of a tier one contractor and stuff like that. The response that they've had on JSL is to heavily audit.
Mm,
There's a lot of that sort of mentality. Audit companies have massively grown
Yeah.
So definitely a big thing at the moment. Obviously, you focus on things like compliance and stuff yourselves, so you would have seen that probably your side.
Yeah, of
But
course.
there's been some big, we'll say, winners is an honest way of putting it in auditing companies that probably would have done very little work. I think they're very busy at the minute with long waiting lists because lots of badges have come
Yes, of
out,
course,
right?
of course.
Which include, Safe Rec. I think was it FCSA
That's
launched.
another one.
Is it Ready Pay? No,
Yes,
Very Pay.
very
Very
pay.
Pay,
Yeah, yeah.
for example, and yeah, you've got various other auditing companies out there that is quite an interesting one. How have you found that for your business? You getting demanded sort of verification? How many badges have you got now? Essentially, right?
We're going through the processes. Of course, I think that there's an industry standard, and for us, we've been around for 21 years, and we want to be around for another 21 more. And we're investing heavily into accreditations and technology and tools that are going to allow us to operate at the standard that the market needs now.
Yeah,
You've mentioned a few of them already, but in terms of that, I think from the client, you know, engaging new businesses, partnerships, definitely more layers to conversations that need to happen at that enterprise level. Well, like you say, that kind of end
yeah,
contractor, or your
yeah,
more end hirer, and medium to large end hirer. But I think equally there does appear on the other end of that spectrum, a lot of, I can't remember the figure, so I may butcher this, but I think most recruitment agencies are under 5 headcount. If you look at it from
oh
a
yeah,
from a so they're small businesses and family businesses, and even at that level, that are maybe still engaging these bigger enterprises, but that conversation that you're having with the agency, because we can support into agency or in hirer, there does appear to be more of an air of caution. There does appear to be more questions asked than before. But I think equally, there's probably not a real clear understanding of what good benchmarking looks like in a procurement standpoint from a payroll microphone, from a payroll engagement perspective. And I think there's a huge amount of education that the market is going to be going through. And we try to lead with, as you say, there's a lot of information out there, some good, some bad, some indifferent. And I think for us, it's always around trying to give the right information out so people can make informed choices. And that includes from the buying stage, hey, make an informed decision. If you're going to engage your labor through us, you need to be confident. You need to know that you can get real-time information. You need to know you can get payslips examples when you need it. You need to know that the structure and the onboarding process for those workers can hold up in court. Because again, you've got the AI, which is empowering workers to some extent, where they're now more savvy than unemployment law and tribunals, and that's going to become
yeah,
a big thing.
yeah,
There's going to be more, just especially with day one rights and sick
yeah,
pay and things like that. All of those
yeah,
conversations, you've got a much more informed audience now, I think, and
yeah.
the market is ripe for that education, I think, in some regards. But
100%.
that's there's a lot of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Sorry, jumping around a bit, I think,
No,
but
that's all right. So we'll go back to what we think will happen. So I'll give you my viewpoint, and feel free to disagree, because I actually like it when people disagree. Because it'll be interesting to see how you think things are going to play out. But I think what will happen, if I was sitting there and I was appointed as so I do audits and stuff like that. I do auditing myself. Um, and if I was to be an auditor, we'll call him an auditor, from the Fair Work Agency, right? Sitting there in 6 months' time going, we've launched joint several liability. We're going to overly scrutinize the CIS scheme, which is probably overdue, if I'm honest. But we're going to use that legislation to join the dots of that. Because if you are wrongly classified from a classification risk perspective as self-employed when you should be employed, there's a load of tax you haven't paid, right? That's why they'll use that legislation. So they're actually going to tie in employed and non-employment, and probably IR35 and the offshoring legislation, which dates back a number of years. They're going to merge all these things in one piece of legislation. So the whole spectrum is actually at risk, which is interesting, because we only say, it's only the umbrella company you need to worry about. Actually, you need to worry about classification risk, right? Openly. But why I'm getting to my point, which is I would go for every low-hanging fruit to get every case study going. And I can imagine they'll go and pick every fish and chip shop, every chicken and chip shop, every hairdresser, every construction site that they can go to, anywhere which they think is an easy opportunity, typically entry level. And the reason why I say this is actually twofold. It's not just about joint several liability, because they might be compliant in those areas. They'll go for those areas because you've got, it's like a hybrid of the Home Office, whether they're actually paying minimum wage, whether they're actually getting holiday pay properly, paying conditions
or if it's
effectively.
cash in
It's
hand,
almost like
or if
a
it's
strange union, micro union in an about way, is what the Fair Work Agency will be. So if you've got a building site, as an example, where you've got wrong classification as CIS, they're not being paid minimum wage, they're probably not got right to work. Not accusing anyone at this point, but these things in history have been rife, and they're all over things like Construction Inquirer. These things happen, right? Essentially, they shouldn't, but they do. They're just going to find an easy picking for lots of case studies. The moment find one thing, they'll just go full shop. Let's go for all of them. We'll go for the jugular, if you like, of all these different things. That's my predictor of what the next couple of years will end up like. If they get a delay with all this employment rights stuff, even bigger holes that they could dig into. It'll be carnage, is how I would see it. But that's my predictor, because I think that's how they'll make their money back.
Yeah.
This government before they go.
Again, not to get too
Yeah,
political as such,
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, look, I don't have a crystal ball as such. Like, I think that at least in the next 12 months, it's got to be a period of adjustment, and I think be that operationally, and then kind of moving into the next 12 months after that. That's when I think that pressure will probably come. And if people haven't adapted in the right ways quick enough this year and into next, that's when maybe some of these big headline cases start to take effect. Or as we said earlier in the conversation, I think maybe once that happens, that's when the motivation for people to start moving and changing how they operate will be. I think in our industry, people are still trying to figure it out. I mean, the legislation is pretty black and white in terms of what it is, but people have got long-standing relationships with suppliers that have been built on trust, and trust can be hard to break until testing moments come through. And then ultimately, as the legislation says, like, regardless of if there's trust or if there's documentation or if there's proof of it, but it's then turned out it's not been true, that's not good enough as a defense anymore, right? Yeah. So it's going to be really interesting to see kind of how all of that comes into play. But I think it's not a moment to kind of, as I said earlier, knee-jerk reaction, rip the Band-Aid off. I've got to strip down my PSL. I've got to do this. It's about understanding and understanding what governance looks like. And I think that's kind of where people's, in the smaller to medium-sized businesses, that's probably where I'd say the biggest changes in behaviors and things are going to be. But yeah, I think if the supply chain shortens a little bit, and then businesses are able to reduce complexity and have full visibility and understand what their true supply chain looks like, and making sure that there's no hidden employment versus limited, as you're saying, and things like that. That's when it's going to become a bit easier to manage and easier to predict, I guess. But yeah, does that answer your question?
It does. So I was going to say, but you've kind of half answered it, which was, and although I understand why the world does this, particularly social media, from a negativity perspective, let's look at the positives and what education, what quick fixes people can do to start. Because it's always about, like most things, you've got to start somewhere, even if it's not perfect, right? And if it's not perfect, fix it quickly, please. But if it's not perfect, at least start somewhere. I think the Home Office, and what I've read directly from the Home Office in some cases, not Home Office, sorry, HMRC, apology, from HMRC, is that they'll give some sort of forgiveness if you're working towards something. They're not expecting perfection as such, right? They're expecting you to sort it out.
Yeah, of course.
Which will be a complexity that's beyond some people in some cases, right? So I suppose if you were to say, here's some quick tips or some guidance, what do you think they should think about and do?
Contracts first and foremost. Have strong contracts, read through them, understand them, make sure that there's rights to investigate them and investigate the business where you need to. Make sure that you've got the rights to request information on contractors and workers. Within realms of GDPR and things like that. But then equally be able to kind of ask and get evidence of payroll and PAYE things being all contributed up to the right spec, making sure that on a whim, if needed, you can supply that on point. Obviously, we spoke about SafeRec and things like that. I think there's a world where, again, there's a benchmark that we all need to meet and work to, and those tools are there for that to ensure we're all keeping accountable to what the industry needs and what's right for the worker. Making sure that there's no bizarre deductions on pay slips and things like that. Making sure that they're able to reconcile things in the right way. But I think ultimately it's governance and having a plan. And finally, I think as a further point, it's making sure that reality, the contracts and all of these things are existing in line with what's actually happening for the workforce and things like that. Because again, if just because you've got, to your point, if you've got a really thorough insured contract that covers all the A, Bs and Cs, but you've got someone that's not gone through supervision, direction, control, compliance, and they're on site and there should be a PAYE worker, that's not going to hold up either. It's all around making sure that transparency, the right information is available when you need it, and things line up to what's actually happening in reality.
Yeah.
If you're doing that should get you in a good place.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the things that I would add to it is not every business has got the budget capacity, right people, right, to do things in-house. Don't be scared to get external fractional, an audit company, whatever it happens to be, to guide you through it. You don't have to do stuff on your own.
Exactly.
I know it's a difficult economy and people don't have a lot of money, right? We were talking about that openly earlier, but I do think there is value in getting a second opinion.
Yeah. Of course, definitely.
I think that's definitely the way to go. Particularly, there are some really great payroll companies out there, including yourselves, but there are not so, and that's why they launched this legislation. So if you are just like, they might be nice people, but you're unsure, get an opinion, cover yourself in terms of that. And I think that's a great starting point. Have faith in that, and then really understand what does, I think you need to educate yourselves as a business around classification rather than be a gun to the head approach of, well, I'm not going to go and work on your site if you don't give me this arrangement. It's like, at the end of the day, it's like, as much as you want to fill a job, if you're just giving them the profit and your profit is going to be going to HMRC because you've categorized it right, there was no point in hiring that person.
Exactly.
You've got to accept the risk is way outweighs the value of that person, and they will conform eventually when they can't get a gig. To work in the right classification. I'm afraid that is the nature of the beast now.
Yeah,
the industry.
The time will tell, but yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's a change in perception. It's changing thinking, because again, it comes back to that the economics of it all. Need to fill job to get paid to feed family, but actually the risk of it behind it can be, the numbers get scary really quickly, even for you'd consider a small misdemeanor. Let's say that if it kind of goes back far enough, it can be quite a lot of money. So yeah.
The only other thing I would say is we actually talked about this in a different episode that was to do with executive search, and the reason why I talk about bring that up is because one thing we covered in the episode is executive search is really understood in America. They really champion their supply chain. They're like best friends, besties, whatever phrase you want to use. So I've got teenage kids, you can tell, with a phrase like besties. I feel old now as I say that. But in this country, we're always like that step away. It's like being friends with someone is almost like a crime. I don't know why, like some sort of conspiracy because they get on. And the reality of that sort of relationship is you have to change the relationship now with your suppliers, that you are closer. You might not be besties, that's fine, but you certainly should be a lot closer to the cold face of what you're dealing with your supply chain. Because yes, you can contract it if you need to, sensibly, as you rightly pointed out. Don't contract it for contracting's sake, but you can simplify, understand that relationship better, to understand, with transparency is the right word, are you doing this properly? If not, you've got to fix that if you want to keep them around. And there's nothing wrong to, well, let me rephrase that. There's nothing wrong with the approach of honesty around if something's wrong, not being done right. Let's word it that way, as long as it's not illegal. But you can help them, enable them to be better. And I think that enabling word, rather than having a fear factor in all of this is the problem with selling fear, is what people do
Yeah,
in
of course.
JSL, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of fear around it, and
I
I
think
understand
in our
why.
industry, I think that gets thrown around a lot as well. So not just on before JSL was kind of the topic of the month, as it were. But I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, it should be like, let's enable better, let's enable an honest conversation, and let's work together to get you where you need to be to deliver what we need, or you get yourself enabling you to be good enough to do what we need you to do. Either way or both is how you need to approach this. Absolutely, because at the end of the day, the world works on so few margins today. Why throw that margin away? It really isn't worth it, is the way I look at it.
Yeah, for
To
sure.
be honest. So
I was going to, sorry, I've just put that. I was going to add a point, but I've forgotten it.
God, all right. That's all right. It's all good. It's all
Sorry,
good.
apologies.
So I think just to end on, we're going to slightly digress from JSL into, this is like phase one of two phases with the Employment Rights Bill. I kind of alluded where I think that will end up. It might not be as bad, who knows? But I do think there's more and more change. Is there anything different from what we've talked about, do you think businesses need to think about during the final piece of the puzzle when we get to a scary thought, when we get to 2028? Almost depressing. But when we get through all of these changes, is there anything else or anything we should educate the audience with, or an opinion around some of that?
I think it's all, we've covered some of these points before, but the whole classification piece, I think, is going to become a bit of a moment. And look, if the job pays what the job pays, and you need to put someone onto a limited engagement for that job to be done, because I think this is the point I was about to make before. Compliance isn't cheap. There's a cost that's attached to it, and if PAYE needs to be in place, then you need to price your commercials as such.
Well, funny you say that. So, elephant in the room we didn't talk about because I'd forgot, which was, and I won't mention any agency names for what's the word? Disclaimer. But I do know that someone was removed from HS2 due to a classification. Now, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of it because some of this is speculation rather than fact. But they certainly were removed, and people were paid CIS instead of PAYE, when it should have been a PAYE job. And I think they got, I don't know, I would imagine they had to pay it back or pay the difference or whatever happened there. Again, I don't know all the full details.
Probably some fines on top of it as well. And
probably, yeah. So I'll take a sip of water as I say this. So it does highlight the need for good governance of, whenever you engage someone, it is the right classification, done the right way, first time. Because if we ain't even done JSL at that point, this was like a year ago now, right? Essentially, forgot my dates right. Already a year prior, they had problems. And I think HS2 probably have learned a few lessons themselves in terms of auditing. But if they're already got that point and they've penalized companies and classifications wrongs and fines and whatever, imagine what it will be after or now with JSL.
Yeah.
Etc.
As I say, the numbers get very scary very quickly, and for small businesses, it takes one instance, and that's it, livelihood gone. So,
well, even big businesses, if you've got a couple of thousand people, I mean, you
constructions,
can, you don't even need to be a tier one to have 100 million turnover of labor.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're dealing with that kind of number of turnover, right, you could think about the tax. Let's say the tax is 30% of it as a round number. That's not small numbers. That's a killer.
Yeah.
For a business, it's not worth the risk, to be honest. But
it's not.
So I think to end on, otherwise this will be a very long podcast. And I think this is one of two podcasts, to be honest, James, because we're going to talk again
definitely
in some weeks to come, and probably something a little bit more granular, a little bit more in detail that we can really thrash out
Yeah, for sure.
on
Look
your
forward to it.
podcast. Your podcast is, tell the audience.
Yeah, so the Friday Payroll Club, we're part of Bar2, and compliance, contractors, gig economy, and anything in between that. That's kind of what we tend to have conversations on, and we try to keep it as jargon free as possible. So yeah,
That might be difficult for me, but I'll try.
no, I look forward to
Openly.
it.
No, it'd be great. So yeah, likewise. So we'll talk more on that episode soon to come. But yeah, just to end on, apart from thanks for coming on the podcast. And like I say, if there's anything that anyone in the audience wants advice on, reach out to me, reach out to James. It's going to be a tough road for everyone, but I would just end on, it's not an impossible road. Just start your journey. Please start your journey if you haven't, for solving these problems. Look at your classification. And if you don't know, get help. That's the biggest word of advice. Anything else, James, to add to that, do you think?
Not without echoing, no, but yeah, I think know your supply chain. Get to be familiar with it if you're not already, and yeah, start to understand what it means in those realities, and yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. Thanks for coming on board, and I'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Colin.
Thanks for your
Appreciate it.
time.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.